Last question is on 664, and this is the one to me that's really confusing. It looks like it should be two resolutions, not one. The first one part says directing the undertaking of a continuing disclosure review. That implies that there hasn't been a continuing disclosure review to date. Now what this is, and the second part is authorizing participation in the municipality's continuing disclosure cooperation initiative of the Division of Enforcement of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Now that's a self-reporting program the SEC started for, here it is, for municipalities that in their bond disclosures where their official statements contained materially inaccurate statements, and you turn yourself in, and it doesn't say anything about an amnesty, so there probably will be a penalty. But the thing is, it's just confusing to me. I mean, were there materially inaccurate statements in the bond disclosures that would require going to the SEC? It's unusual because this the time period to go ends September 10th, and the next freeholder meeting is September 11th. So it looks to me like somebody's going to start looking at this stuff, and if they think there were materially inaccurate statements, they're going to take it upon themselves to go to the SEC without checking with this board. So that doesn't make sense unless there were materially inaccurate statements, and I believe there are at least two major instances, and you will be going to the SEC. So that's 664 just confuses me. If somebody could just explain that. That's it.
We don't want you to be confused. Director Taylor, you kindly come up and give an explanation on 661.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Indeed, Resolution 664 does deal with the SEC disclosure, continuing disclosure. Municipalities, all local governments nationally have an obligation when they have outstanding debt to report on the EMA website any material items that affect their financial disclosure. This new program that the SEC has implemented speaks to all local entities that have issued debt. And essentially, it is trying to make sure that all issuers, whether or not they've maintained their continuing disclosure. What's interesting about this item is that the SEC has not actually determined and defined what is material as far as their continuing disclosure or entities not meeting that continuous disclosure requirement. So as a result, the local finance board, New Jersey State Local Finance Board, has opted to issue a local finance notice encouraging all local officials, all CFOs, to enter into and adopt the resolution as a safeguard measure. The original deadline was September 10th. However, the deadline has been extended to December 1st. And so this resolution essentially authorizes the administration to do a review going back 5 years of any debt outstanding and review all of the OSs to ensure that we are compliant with our continuing disclosure. I can tell you since 2011 and 12, we've updated our disclosures, and there were some items wherein whether the audit wasn't updated back in 2009 and uploaded to EMA, I think there was a 10-day delay in one instance. So it's those type of things that we're looking at, and the definition of materiality has not been determined. But to err on the safe side and to protect the interests of the issuer, the County of Union, we're going to undertake the review and then file a questionnaire with the SEC as required under this program, and basically take advantage of the amnesty program because there still is ambiguity on the definition of materiality.
But just to be clear, the Department of Community Affairs and the Division of Local Finance sent a directive, or not a directive, a recommendation to all municipal bodies, county municipalities that have issued debt to undertake this resolution.
Absolutely. And it is an item where the county does maintain its disclosure, but again, going back to the definition of materiality, that's one that's ambiguous, and we are trying to be proactive to protect our interests and to, again, review all items going back for the 5-year window.
664 664. Yeah, this is the one that John Berry was talking about, undertaking a disclosure review, and Director Taylor came up and she was talking about an amnesty program and that they are reviewing it. I guess my further question is actually who is doing this review? Because it's questionable who has the background to do this in-depth review. And once the review is done and submitted to the SEC, I guess, is it possible to Oprah the report?
On the values of 664 and the virtue of it. I guess the question was as to who would be conducting said review.
The review would be, through you, Mr. Chairman, excuse me, the review would be conducted with the finance staff within the county as well as our professionals that we engage, our bond counsel specifically. And the review has to comport with the compliance that's spelled out under Rule 15C2-12 as authorized under the Securities Exchange of 1934, my apologies. And so there are people that are qualified, the same people that issue the debt on behalf of the county and authorized to do so. And according to the SEC and the local finance board, this is an initiative that is a self-reporting, i.e. the issuers at hand, which would be the County of Union.
Thank you.
Getting back to this SEC disclosure cooperation initiative, it's not an amnesty program. According to their release, it says those issuers and underwriters who self-report may receive more favorable settlement terms with the SEC than will be available if the issuer or underwriter fails to self-report and the SEC later brings an enforcement action regarding the violations. And it looks fairly serious. Further down in their release, they go into this initiative is intended to address potentially widespread violations of the federal securities laws in connection with representations by issuers about continuing disclosures in bond offering documents. Gives an example of the West Clark Community Schools, where back in 2013 they falsely stated to bond investors that the school had been properly providing annual information notices, and they hadn't, and $279,000 in prejudgment interest and a penalty of $300,000 they got. Now the SEC in its release stated that there is significant concern that many issuers have not been complying with their continuing disclosure obligations and that federal securities law violations involving false statements concerning such compliance may be widespread. And they want you to note that it is not solely the failure to comply with continuing disclosure obligations, rather it is the failure coupled with the false statements in bond offerings that it has complied with prior obligations. So there could be a double penalty. And the SEC, I mean, it's monopoly money. They could be going millions of dollars in fines for this. Now, specifically, Union County, and there may be others, I mean, I didn't look into detail, but the OPEB note in the audit is garbage. If you look at the Essex County, they're doing it right. It's a cumulative number. OPEB obligation started in 07. You started having to report it. Brown & Brown did a study, and for about 5 years now, which may also increase the penalties when SEC looks at that, they're continuing it over and over again. The net OPEB obligation has been reported as the 1 year net OPEB obligation. It's not cumulative. So Union County is reporting like $40 million for retiree benefits, and that's the 1 year thing. Whereas look at Essex County, and they're doing it right. I mean, it's going up from year to year. It's like $200 million. So that's an obvious. I mean, anybody who knows anything at all about OPEBs would spot that. There's also the thing about, you know, the Open Space Trust Fund and where's that going, and the Open Space Trust Fund is going to be gone. And you're using that for operating expenses, but it's going to be gone probably in 2020 unless it's, and that really should be reported. And those are the two things that just pop out at me just glancing over this thing. There may be others. So I would recommend it. I'll look at the local finance notice and all, but this isn't just a, send something to the SEC just to cover ourselves. This is actually fairly serious, and especially if bonds start defaulting from Union County. I mean, you're aware of it now, and there were false disclosures. There could be, liabilities for a lot of other people. I would recommend you kind of look at this more seriously than it appears you are.